everybody. Hello and welcome. It's episode number 77 of Office Hours. I'm Adam Coble. I don't know if you know this about me, but I've played a role-playing game or two in my day. Since yon times historical, I've been playing RPGs, and I would say that probably 90% of that time, 90 to 95% of that time, I'm the dungeon master. So I have accumulated a fair bit of knowledge about dungeon mastering. I've tried a bunch of different games, as you can see. Here they are. I played a ton of different games. I have GM'd in a bunch of different ways. I've done live games. I've done online games. I've done the whole thing. And so I decided some 76 episodes ago to do a show about it. So the way Office Hours works, if this is your first episode, welcome. Hello, thanks for tuning in. If this is your first episode, the way Office Hours works is that over time, I have accumulated questions. Questions about game mastering, questions about the social aspects of games, questions about game design. All of this stuff I've collected through my website, www.adam-coble.com. There's a little link at the top. Guess what? It says Office Hours. If you click it, you can submit your questions too. And so from all of those questions, every week that we do an episode, I gather up 3 of them and we discuss. I talk about the questions. Now, the reason that I do such specific questions, the reason that I don't do a more kind of topical show, and I wanted to address this because I had somebody ask me this a little while ago. They were like, why don't you just do a show about specific topics? Because it seems like, you know, you can kind of answer everybody's question all at once. And to that I reply, well, the great and fascinating and wonderful thing about role-playing games is that every single session of every single game, of every single campaign ever made in the history of time is this like unique, beautiful thing with its own unique and terrible problems. So I answer specific questions that might help people on a more general basis rather than just trying to like shoehorn, let's talk about character creation, because that video would be 1,000 years long. So what I try to do with Office Hours is answer specific conundrums, deal with specific queries, and hopefully you will be able to apply some of what I talk about to your game. And at the very least, hopefully there are 3 people who today I can help with their role-playing game issues. So let's hear our first question. Our first question comes to us from Applesauce. And Applesauce has a question about characters.
Hello, Adam. I'm currently working through my first attempt as DM using Dungeon World. I have some players that no longer like their characters because they feel they don't mesh well with the group or because they feel invalidated by other characters who perform similar roles. Now they want to reroll. Is this a failure on my part as DM for letting the problem get this bad? How should I approach letting players drop their characters for new ones when this sort of thing happens? Thank you for considering my question.
You're welcome, Applesauce. Now let me start with what the real problem with this question is. Did you hear it? Did you hear the problem? Because the problem's not that it's a first attempt. The problem isn't that the players, don't mesh with the characters, don't fit the group anymore. The problem is not any of that horseshit. The problem is this a failure on my part as the DM for letting the problem get this bad? No. Okay, so not only is this not your fault and it's not a failure, it's not a problem. It's like completely not a problem at all. There's nothing wrong with what's going on here, Applesauce. So if I go to the mall and I buy a new hat and I'm like, damn, I love this hat. Thanks for coming to the mall with me, Applesauce, and helping me pick out this hat. And I put on the hat and I wear that hat every goddamn day for like a month, right? And a month later, I'm like, you know what, Applesauce? I'm just not feeling this hat anymore. I'm just going to put this hat back in my closet. I don't think I want to wear this hat anymore. I just wore it a lot. It's not your fault, Applesauce. You didn't pick the hat for me. You didn't put it on my head. You didn't make me wear the fucking hat. It's not your fault. There is nothing I can say this because I co-wrote the game, but this is true of most games. There is nothing in Dungeon World that says, A, you have to stick with your character forever, and B, that it's the GM's responsibility to make you love your character. And C, I guess, that not wanting to play your character means that you don't love them anymore. All of those things are not true. It's not true in Dungeon World. It's not true in Dungeons and Dragons. I do not know a game in which your responsibility as the game master, dungeon master, hollyhock god, computer, whatever, I don't know any game where it's your job to like make the players stick with their characters. Now, I think, and I will take some responsibility for this, I think that in Dungeon World, and this is one of these things I can maybe blame Vincent for, but in Apocalypse World as well, there is a degree of inspiring the game master to love the characters, right? There's that principle in the game, be a fan of the characters. Now, the reason I bring this up as a thing, as a principle, is because unlike in another game where maybe you don't think about this, a game that's more plot-centric or a sandbox game where the characters don't matter as much, in Dungeon World and in Apocalypse World, being a fan of the characters means giving a shit about the characters, their place in the world, and the narrative that surrounds them. It means embracing and investing in that space. Which means when a player comes to you and says, hey, so I don't really feel like my character fits the group anymore, or, I started off as like the druid and now the ranger has picked up some magic and we're kind of like overlapping a little bit. I'm going to try playing a cleric. It can hurt a little bit because you're like, but I'm a fan, right? And I think that that's okay. I think it's okay to feel that sting, but you got to feel it in the right way, right? It's not the sting of failure. This isn't like, oh, you screwed up a rule and now my character is dead and we all feel awkward about it. This is the sting of something you love coming to an end. And that's the story of this character. Now, I think that we should all just get better. And maybe this is just a combination of my own personal philosophy that nothing fucking matters and that you should just love things desperately because they will soon evaporate. That also applies to Dungeons and Dragons. But that, and the fact that I have so much experience as a game master and relatively little experience as a player, I tend to feel like we need to embrace endings, right? We need to fall in love as much with the conclusion, the retirement, the bloody murder of the characters that we love. We need to embrace that as much as we love their introduction to the game world, right? We need to care about that moment as much, if not more, than we care about all of the other stuff that happens to them. And I think that many games don't do this very well, right? Can you, off the top of your head, dear audience, can you think of a game in which there are mechanical ramifications, mechanical stuff for when the character is done, right? Either they're killed in the game, they retire from the game. Now, I think these kinds of things are starting to they're starting to build up, right? They're starting to accumulate in design, right? Like Blades has a little bit of that. There are a few games where you can retire your character. They're starting to. Apocalypse World has that move. That's right. So we're seeing some of these, and I love them. I feel like that kind of thing should be built into games more because so often we're conditioned by Dungeons and Dragons to see the only way our character leaves is, to paraphrase Moses himself, when the character is pried from our cold dead hands, right? When we see our characters leave the game, it's almost always because they've been stabbed, shot, burned, consumed, fallen off a cliff, etc. So I think that both culturally, as people who tell stories using role-playing games, and mechanically as designers, I think that there is something to be said for learning how to exit a scene, right? We're pretty good at making characters. That is a codified process, but we're not great at like what happens when. Now, if you look back at some character exits in the various campaigns that I've run, I have always tried to, I go one way or the other. I try to make the characters exit either supremely meaningful to them, to the world at large, whatever, or utterly pointless. And I try to be clear that that's part of the framework of the narrative and that it's something that's in the game. Like, for example, one of each from the same campaign. In Swan Song, let's say Mr. Sicarian leaving the game was one of the kind of meaningful and powerful and significant endings, right? Where I was like, you have a choice here, Jeff. Your character has accomplished their biggest goal. They have been fighting for this thing as far as the game has gone. Would you like to leave that goal behind and pick up something new, or are you ready to say goodbye to this character, right? And that created tension and drama and excitement. And I love in this regard the ending of a character as them getting what they want. Because if you think about it, many role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons especially, you cannot win, right? Now, people say role-playing games aren't a game where you should try to win, which I think is false. I think that there are lots and lots of mechanisms in D&D to attempt victory, but you can't win Dungeons and Dragons. And I don't mean that in a mushy, like, it's about telling stories with your friends way. I mean that mechanically, you continue to play D&D until you lose. You cannot win. There is no built-in, you did it, right? You run out of room to evolve your character. You become the most powerful you can become, but you can't really win. There's no win condition. The game does not end at a certain time or under certain conditions. So what I try to do is offer up exit points for characters. Because I think the worst thing here, Applesauce, is not that your players come to you and say, I don't want to play this character anymore. That is not the failure. The failure is the person who sticks through the whole campaign with a character that they don't want anymore, right? Get out of that bad relationship, right? Find a new character to fall in love with. You all can. That's the point, right? Or the other way that you can have characters leave the game is the much more traditional approach. This is the exit is meaningless. You can ditch your character for any reason, and sometimes the game will take your character away from you, right? If you want to, you can just say, I don't care about this character anymore. I don't want to write a big fancy ending for them. I'm just done. And sometimes the game does that for you. Sometimes the game says, you've got 1 hit point. Are you really going to try to rush up a flight of stairs towards some guys with laser rifles? You are? Okay. Well, now you're dead. It was pointless, but we knew that, and it said something about the overarching narrative. I think that we need to, and again, this goes back to me never being able to hold on to characters, because as a GM, you just lose your characters at the drop of a hat. And I don't just mean that players kill them, though that certainly happens, but you get a character, they enter the universe, you love them desperately, but then the players move on. This is especially true in games that move from place to place, right? If you make an NPC and you invest a bunch of time and energy and love into them, all you're going to get, and this is where we start to blur into the kind of hot for teacher question. The only time you really have with a character is in the moment, while you are embodying them. This moment, this sentence, this word, these actions, this scene, today's session, you may never get to visit this character again. So you need to make them fun and memorable, and you need to love them for what they are in this moment. And if tomorrow you never want to play them again, that's fine. And that goes for players too, right? In character creation, we invest time and energy, and maybe most importantly, curiosity into our characters. We build characters where we say, I wonder, right? I wonder what it would be like to play this character. I wonder what it would be like to be an elf. I wonder what it would be like to be a paladin. I've never been any of these things in this game. I have some ideas, but really, character creation is about asking questions of the world. What would it be like to embody this person into the story, right? But sometimes we answer those questions, or we find the questions not to be that interesting anymore, right? Sometimes when we make a character, when we play that character, we find, oh, the answer to what would it be like to play an elf in this setting is I just don't care. It's not a fun answer. And it doesn't mean we failed. It doesn't mean that we have lost something. It just means we're done asking the questions that character can answer. And I think that that's valid. So, Applesauce, my dear, the thing to remember here is that you're not failing, your players aren't failing, you're all doing okay, and if the players want to change characters, consider that an opportunity to reinvigorate, right? And it can happen for any reason, right? Sometimes it's mechanical, sometimes it's like, well, playing a fighter is boring. That's fine. Sometimes it's investment. Sometimes it's like, I don't feel like this character. I'm not feeling him anymore. The love is gone. And that's okay, right? What I would suggest, right? Because the real question that Applesauce is asking here is, how do I approach characters, players dropping their characters for new ones? What do I do in that situation? And I think it depends, right? I think it depends. It depends on why they want to drop it and what the current situation is. Never, my thought at least, unless you're all agreeing to this, but never force someone to keep playing a character they don't want, right? If somebody comes to you and says, God, and again, this is such a hot for teacher question. Somebody comes to you and they say, now I know that we have been married for 20 years, but I just don't love you anymore. I think we should get a divorce. You can say, no, just stay married to me. Nothing's going to change. Just don't go anywhere. Let's stay together for the children, right? Don't leave me. Nothing's going to, but just stick around. Come on. Like, you don't really want to leave, right? You don't want to do that. You want to instead say, okay, if that's what you really want, I accept that, but let me share some thoughts with you about how we could improve or change the situation, right? Because sometimes, as a GM, you've built a lot of your prep or you've constructed a narrative around a character's needs and desires in the game, right? Now, I do this. I build games to respond to the characters. And sometimes having someone say, I don't really want to play this character, or my character just died randomly, sometimes for me, that's very hard. It's hard to readjust, and I need time, and it takes energy, and I would rather they keep playing the character. And so what I'll do is I'll sit down with them as a player and say, hey, so let's talk about why you don't want to play your character anymore. Let's see, are there things we could change as a group together that would make your character more fun, or are you ready to break up with this character? If so, is this they lay down their sword and they say, you know what, guys, this whole quest for the ring thing, I'm not into it anymore. I'm going back to the Shire, and I'm gonna get a farm, and I'm gonna farm until either you win or Mordor kills us all. All right, I'm done with adventure, right? Or do you want to make a big deal out of it, right? Would you like to have some kind of closure? Because I think that we can as a group take a step back and we can look at the story we're telling from a director's stance and say, okay, what can we as a group do to allow you to have your big moment? And I keep going back to and this just goes to show how briefly they were in the show, Max's gnome druid in Court of Swords. The gnome druid that he played at the beginning of the arc with Kalimat. It was very clear very quickly that his character no longer fit the group's moral compass, let's say. He had priorities that directly ran counter to the group. So we talked about it. There was some opportunity for PvP, and we said, you know what? That would be good. That'd be a great way to end it. It'll be tense. We haven't done any PvP in forever. Let's play it out. We all agreed to the stakes. Max would stop playing that character either way, but we didn't force Max to keep playing the character because we could all see that it just wasn't a good fit anymore. But there might have been an opportunity had Max had an idea for his character to change, or if the other players had said, you know what, you could probably turn us around on this. And I go back on these moments to something that I learned from playing Blades in the Dark with John Harper and Strash and Sean Nittner, where there would be a moment where I would want something as Cantor, and Sean would not want it as RC, or vice versa. And John would ask the person being convinced, is there any way that your character could come around on this? And the person being asked would just take a minute and think about it. And if they said no, I don't think so. Like, I think this is a hard line. We just went with it. We were like, all right, so keeping that in mind, how hard do we want to push? What do we want to do? I think a lot of groups, for the sake of not being meta or for the sake of immersion, refuse to just talk to each other about, like, if these things happened, how would your character respond? But I think the core thing, and the thing that I really want to hammer home for Applesauce here, is that you're not failing. Characters leaving the game is fine, and there are a bunch of different ways you can do it. I would suggest sitting down with your group and with the player and saying, okay, are there any ways you could see us as a group making it better for you to keep playing this character? Do you want that? No? Okay. do you want to set something up where your character can leave the group heroically, or do you just want them to montage away, right? Figure it out. Like, talk to your group. Deal with the specific case as they come, but don't be so attached to the idea of them continuing to play these characters. Let them go, right? Because the great fun of being a player is that while you only get one character at a time, you get to invest everything in a character. And when you're done with that investment, let them let it go. Because then they get to make a new character. And a new character is like a whole new exciting world for you to build your narrative around. A new character comes with, in Dungeon World, bonds to screw things up. They will probably come with their own backstory. They will be dragging a bunch of fronts along behind them that will get involved in your campaign. A new character is a new chapter in your ongoing fantasy epic. And I'm always excited about new characters, whatever the reason they come into play. And you can't have new characters if you never make room for the old ones to go away. So there you go. Can't have beginnings without endings. And I like it when a character leaves. I think it shows some initiative on the part of the player where they're like, cool, I'm done. I'm done with this character. Thanks, everybody. Our next question comes to us from David RPGs, and I think it might be about pirates.
Hello, Mr. Coble. So, here is my situation. I stream and GM a 5e game with a group of fairly new D&D players, and we decided that for our second story arc that the party would be sea adventurers. Now, this is a really cool concept, and we've been having a ton of fun role-playing it, but the problem is that D&D doesn't really give you much in the way of guidelines for sea combat. My party loves combat, and I do too, and I want to make ship-to-ship combat fun and exciting, both for ranged and melee combatants, but I'm not finding much in the way of rules and mechanics to make that happen. I've been homebrewing some stuff, but with very limited success. So, any and all ideas on how to run this type of combat would be greatly appreciated. And for context, the world is pre-gunpowder, so no cannons, and they are on a caravel style of ship with 20 crewmen. Thank you so much.
Well, pirates, is it? Pirates, is it? Or like, I don't know, like ship stuff. Like we can call it sea adventurers if we want to. We can call it sea combat or whatever. But honestly, let's call a rose a rose. We're talking about pirates. So I love this question. And normally what would happen with a question like this is I would admonish David for not doing the design work, right? This question is really, hey Adam, D&D doesn't do the thing that I want. Make it for me. But I'm not going to because that's not my job. But we can talk about it. So what is happening here with David? And what I love about this question is that David is very wise about this, right? David understands the core of the problem, but you can see that David is doing what 5e does, right? This isn't a problem where it's like, I'm trying to do cyberpunk with 5th edition. It's not, I'm trying to do like romance drama with 5th edition. It's, I GM 5e, we're having fun. We want to do boat shit. D&D is not giving me anything to do boat shit. However, we like fighting, right? We like fighting. We want ship fights to be fun, and we're not being supported. What do you think we should do? So this is actually a solvable problem, right? So many questions about 5th edition and any role-playing game really are about not understanding the core stuff. So yes, David RPGs, you could just run a game of 5e without adding anything to it. You could put it on a boat, you could roll initiative when fights start, and it could just be you need to get from one boat to the other and then fight each other, right? Because that's what D&D gives you rules for. It doesn't give you rules for two ships fighting. A ship is not a thing in D&D. A ship is not a thing in the way that a tree is not a thing, or a bridge is not a thing, or a house is not a thing, right? They are simply fictive objects that we fight on and around. It is a set piece. There are no real rules for making two ships fight each other. Now, the easiest thing that you could do then is to look at the existing mechanics you have and extrapolate them out, right? Like, you probably don't want to build an entire subsystem of ships chasing each other and coming up broadside and positioning your ships and firing your crossbows and what have you across the bow, right? Like, you don't necessarily want to do that, but if you want to, you can continue, right? You're saying you're having limited success. It's certainly possible, but what I would do is just look at the things that are already given to you in the game and find ways to extrapolate those out to represent the things that are interesting in ship combat. Now, if your group is hooked on the idea of everybody having like jobs and you know, operating their ship as a separate subsystem, you will need to either find, hack, or build your own thing. Now, I can't speak to what might be available kind of unofficially. I know that there's some Unearthed Arcana stuff, which I honestly don't trust to be balanced or good in games. They have released things that are not functional. So there might be some third-party thing. You could certainly look around and try to find something like that and either use it wholesale or cut it up. There are rules for damaging objects you could probably extrapolate, right? So you could say ships have a damage resistance value. They have a certain number of hit points. You could make a ship basically like a monster, right? You could take the fate approach and say ships get their own turns, and on their turns, the crew of the ship gets to take actions, right? This is probably what I would do. That way, if a character is not part of the crew, right? If they're a PC, they could use their turn to help the ship on its turn, get advantage on something, moving or whatever. This keeps the focus on the players as the core thing. And really, the combat would be about, on our turns, we're jumping, we're fighting, we're still very much focused on our crew. We're not really about, like, then the ship does this thing, right? That's how I would do it, because it's not about the ships as the core narrative thing. They simply have something they can do in battle, and maybe if they take enough damage, they can sink, but really that's about what do the players do when the ship starts sinking, right? So that's kind of how I would do it. A mix of like treating them like monsters, essentially like characters, the way that Fate does, and give them actions, give each ship actions, and they can attack each other, or they can have special abilities depending on the ship or whatever, and the players can help. And if you wanted to, you could give each ship a crew, and you could have the crew as a separate thing that could take damage as the ship does or whatever. That's where I would start, right? Hack what is already there, and hack what's already there in the core systems of the game before you start looking elsewhere. Now, if you want to go further into that, we zoom out and we don't really care about our characters. Like, it doesn't matter that this ship has the 4 adventurers on it. What matters is that this is the adventurer's ship. You know, like how Data and Picard and Worf, etc., stop mattering all that much when we zoom out and we're watching the Enterprise flying around. The Enterprise is the character there. So that's a bit different, right? That's a different approach. And that's one that D&D doesn't really do very well, because it doesn't handle shared characters, it doesn't handle vehicles as characters, and you're going to have to, again, homebrew, hack, build your own thing, right? That is something that you will have to do. I think that there's some work ahead of you regardless of what you end up doing. But if you want to go that direction, if you want to go the Enterprise direction, I would look at space games, honestly, because I think ship-to-ship combat is a lot better done in sci-fi games than it is in any pirate game I've ever played. This is the thing, though. What we're doing here, David, is that we're looking down the barrel of becoming a game designer, right? All I'm telling you, these things, like, yeah, look at a bunch of different games, figure out what your design goals are. What is the narrative result that you want? Guess who's becoming a game designer? It's your ass, right? You are. So if you want to go down that route, look at a bunch of sci-fi games. Yes, look at other games that do ship combat. play all those games, even just like a little with your friends, like we're going to do some mock ship combat, play them all, make a note of how they work well, how they don't work, look at what they do in relation to their greater design, understand the greater design of those games, and in like a year or so, you'll be in a position to write something really cool for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. And then maybe you can publish it. And then now no one else has to have this problem except if they want a slightly different kind of ship combat. So what I would suggest, if you're going to go ahead and design, like I don't care that the world is pre-gunpowder. I don't care about it's a caravel ship with 20 crewmen. None of that matters right now. That is way too much detail. What I would suggest, and I think you've got a pretty solid handle on this, David, what I would suggest is look at Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and get a handle on what D&D gives a shit about. I think you've got this, right? Fighting. Combat. Fun, exciting combat for ranged and melee combatants. So look at that and build a system of ships that also cares about the same stuff. Do not, for the love of God, do not create a system about long-haul ship travel and cargo weight, right? And weather and like, it's about jumping from ship to ship and fucking stabbing people with your swords and casting fireball on the hull and like all of that stuff. It's about conjuring reef sharks and throwing your enemies into the water to be eaten by those sharks. Do not make your subsystem about anything other than that, because that's what D&D cares about. Now, if you want to do ship travel stuff, look at the existing travel rules and modify them according to your ships. So when you're thinking about making ship stuff, focus on the Errol Flynn swashbuckling bullshit. That is the core focus. But think about the ways that these things, these ships that you're adding, will move you towards solving other problems or filling other gaps in the rules. Because once people have a boat, they're going to want to use it to go far away. What does that mean? Does wind direction matter? Right? Is that something that's gonna matter in your game? But remember, 5th edition is about the characters. It's not about vehicles. And anything that you do needs to remember that. Give the characters unique, cool shit to do. Make it feel like a 5e ship battle thing. Do not make it feel like Traveler screwed onto the side of your Dungeons and Dragons campaign, because that's not what the game is for. Right? And I'm only saying this kind of on a broader sense so that everybody hears me say it, not so that you think that David doesn't understand. Because look at the question. David gets it, right? It's about jumpy, fighty, spellcasty D&D shit, but on a boat. So yeah, I personally have like no real interest in this stuff. I think playing the last Pillars of Eternity game kind of turned me off of like fantasy boats as a thing. I don't really like pirate fiction. Jumping from boat to boat doesn't really interest me. I want spaceships. So I play a sci-fi game, right? I play the right game for that. But yeah, do some research. Look at a bunch of other games, right? Look at games that care about that stuff, but make sure that meshes, right? Find the things that other games have to offer that overlap with 5e's design goals, and then co-op them, right? Rewrite them, grab them, build them for yourself, and make them into your own thing. And then for the love of God, if it's cool, give it away, publish it. Like let other people benefit off of your hard work. Because if you're going to spend hours and hours learning about how to make 5e ship battles fun, and then you just keep that to yourself, how dare you? Don't do that. Because we want that too. I mean, I don't, but somebody probably does. So good luck, David's RPG. Good luck with your design. Welcome to being a game designer. It's equal parts amazing and fun, and then like tiring and miserable. But when you get to the end of a project and you get other people to play this thing that you've made, oh, you're gonna fucking love it. You're gonna love that shit. So welcome. Good luck. I hope that if I haven't helped, I've at least like nudged you towards doing the thing, because I think that there's room for this thing that you want in D&D, and I bet you other people are going to enjoy it too. Yeah. Thanks, David. So David says he streams and GMs a 5e game. His URL is twitch.tv/DavidRPGs. So if you want to check that out, I don't know, maybe he's already got some boat stuff going on. Go and check out David's channel. Our last question comes from Wright, and I chose this question. Because the whole way through, I just sat here feeling so fucking called out. Like, this question basically was just like, hey, Adam, I have an Adam problem.
Hi, Adam. Recently, while GMing a Starts With That Number campaign, I decided to give the PCs a big ship with a bunch of NPC crew members. I generated the NPCs, we did a fun job interview session where the players chose the NPCs they liked the best, and they flew off-world. Immediately, the flaw in my flawless GM plan revealed itself. I now had a number of de facto party members to RP by myself, all of whom had their own interests and motivations and ways of talking and so on, which might have been okay in isolation. What I hadn't counted on was that putting them in an enclosed space with the PCs meant that I was going to have to RP all of them, all of the time. The task ended up overwhelming me and making the game less fun for others, eventually contributing to a campaign reboot with a smaller ship. My question is this: how do I RP NPC crew members in Stars Without Number and companion, quote-unquote, NPCs in general, without either turning them into an interchangeable Greek chorus or accidental GMPCs? Thanks very much. I love your work.
Well, I think this might be the only time anyone has ever said we're gonna need a smaller boat. So here's the thing, and I run into this a lot, where you're like, I'm going to fill the world with like exciting, cool NPCs that matter and have desires and like want things and like they're the hero of their own story. And I think that's great. I think that's really important. You build a network of complex social interactions between these characters and the PCs, right? And then you realize you got fucking 46 characters that you have to constantly manage, and you've made a terrible mistake because now you're having these conversations with yourself. Now, I think the thing to remember here, and this is the solution that I often use, and this very much comes from like a lot of my kind of expertise with the way that NPCs interact with PCs has come from running NPC heavy games, right? I just like it, right? You look at my Burning Wheel game, you look at any game where the players stay in one place long enough, either on their ship or in a city or whatever, where they build up a lot of characters. Apocalypse World, Burning Wheel, both do this a lot. And I like it. I like having like a massive sort of a tapestry of NPCs to call on, because I think each NPC can say something about the world that they belong in. Now, the thing you have to remember is that the story of your game inevitably will not be about those characters. When we look back and we retell the story of our campaign, it won't be, remember all these things these NPCs did, right? The NPCs are there to react to and to antagonize and to challenge and to support and to bolster the player characters, right? And you need to be able to draw lines between an NPC and a PC for them to matter. And if those lines start to come apart, if those threads begin to unwind, then that's okay. We do this thing in games, and you can see this happening in any of my NPC-heavy games, where characters will emerge from the narrative when they first have something that I need to do with them, right? They'll show up because either they're directly tied to a PC already, or because I need them to say something about the world or to challenge a PC or something. And then, once they're done that job, they'll usually fade away unless a PC holds on to them, right? Now, the thing is, generating a bunch of NPC crew members for your ship, I think, was probably the actual only problem, the only mistake that you made here, right? Because what you can do, and this is what I did for Farvrona, is leave gaps, right? It's like drawing a map and leaving blanks in Dungeon World, but the map is not of a dungeon or a fantasy kingdom. It's about a social strata. It's about a place in which the characters exist socially, not physically. So you can say, instead of saying, you know, Captain Chiodo and the Richter and his right-hand man Yancey and the Serpent's Doctor and like detail everyone, what you can do is just say, here are all the positions on the ship. These are the 4 that the PCs hold, the end. And the first time an NPC comes up in the game, you just say, okay, let's make up this NPC. And you can follow whatever your personal protocols are and whatever the game gives you for making NPCs, right? Like, if you have a mechanic, you can have them circles up the captain. Like, obviously the captain is there, but what you're really doing is letting them establish their relationship to the captain, right? It's a connect role to connect to someone who is already in existence. Because connect isn't just for generating new characters. It can be about getting your hands on a character that already exists and setting the tone. And you can use that, if you want, in an Apocalypse World style, where you can say, if you get a 10 or better, you name 2 things about this NPC, and I'll name 1. If you get a 7 and 9, we both name 1, and if you miss, I'll tell you 2 things, one of which is going to be bad, and you can say 1 thing about them to help you. And that will give you 3 details about that NPC, and away they go, right? They're in the world now, and they matter because they're connected to a PC. And if you care about an NPC, if you're actually interested in continuing to play them, connect them to another NPC, or connect them to another PC, right? It's the Vincent Baker PC triangle thing. You want to put NPCs in between characters, right? Because, again, the only reason these NPCs really matter is their relationship to either the player characters themselves or the things the PCs want, right? So don't fill in all your blanks right away. Don't necessarily do that. Or if you've got, like, I've got an arc coming up for Farvrona where I have like 6 new NPCs that I'm going to need to introduce. Now, I am not going to do a dossier of these NPCs and be like, here you go, read and learn this before we play. I'm not going to do that. I'm also not going to be like, you walk into a party, all the NPCs are there. Here's their descriptions. I have to do individual unique voices for them, whatever. They're going to get introduced to the players slowly to build them up, right? Let them enter the spotlight, and as the characters, my player characters, get more and more interested or more invested in these characters, these NPCs, I will continue moving them towards the front. But by extension, characters that the players are not that interested in, you can just fade them away. They never have to be in scenes. You don't need them. They're just in the background, wearing their orange uniform, operating their station, and they just don't matter until they do, right? Now, I think the larger question of like how to manage a bunch of unique individual characters, how to answer that question is an old one. I've been answering this one for a long time. Don't overcomplicate them, right? Think of like 3 things that matter about these characters and nothing else. Let that determine what the character does. And the way that I would create these NPCs to keep them different is not to give them all like different accents. It's about intonation and about the way you embody the character, right? So if you make a character who is like a sniveling, lick-spittle toady, right? A character who all he wants to do is attach himself to the most powerful character and just like be their best friend. You don't have to give them like a weird like Igor voice, right? You don't have to do your worm tongue impression. Just do like a normal voice you are comfortable doing, but like change the way you hold your body, right? Or slow down the way you speak. They don't have to be big different things, because that way you don't end up with a thing where you're like, well, the captain is German and the first mate is Welsh and the medical officer is Danish, and now I have to remember all these accents and then do them whenever the characters are around. Instead, you can find another way to embody them. Like my example for this is always Pi, right? So when I want to play a character that is really earnest, but maybe in like kind of a creepy way. someone who is like kind of boring into your soul, instead of looking at the monitor that I have the players on or looking at my Roll20 monitor, I look right at the camera, right? So for Pi, the way that I changed the way I present my voice, I didn't do an accent. I just slowed down my voice a little bit and I talked a little quieter and I stared right at the camera. And I acted like that was a totally normal thing to do, right? And it's not about like making a big performance out of every character, because if you do that, you're going to run out of big performances. Instead, you just find a couple of little things you can do that will help you get into that character. So for your little like Wormtongue Igor analog, maybe hunch your shoulders when you speak. It'll change your voice a little bit, whether you want it to or not. Right? So just like try that, or like pick a physical thing you can do. Adjust your clothes a lot. Like find a way to express that, because the character's personality doesn't just come from the way you do the voice. The voice is the thing that we focus on, right? It's the thing that we idealize as a way to separate NPCs from one another, but it's so much more just about like little subtle clues to push the character's personality. And you can't do that until you know a little bit about them. So when you have a character, whether you are building all three things or you and your players are collaborating to build things, because remember, you can always ask. You can be like, what have you heard about the captain? Right? Tell me something about the captain. And the players can help you fill in those three things, and then that will lead you to the voice. Now, this can be tricky when you are having characters circled up, or you're having characters connected using a mechanic where you did not expect them, where the players are like, yeah, I need a guy and this is what he's like, and bam, give me this character. Do the voice. Do a character voice. Come up with a totally unique character right now with no prep. Now, what you can do instead is you can draw on a couple of like loose things, and just your players will acknowledge that the characters will build up as you go, right? I mean, this is a fun thing for me because chat is always like, why is their accent different when I'm first like finding a character? And I think that's totally okay. I think it's okay to like learn your character. Even professional actors do this, right? Like, look at a character at the end of the first season versus the beginning or 2 seasons later. Look at the way the actor has filled that character. And if they are professionals who are allowed to develop their character over the course of time, you, as ostensibly an amateur dungeon master, you are allowed to do that because you're playing, like in this case, a ton of characters all at once. But just remember that the characters that you are playing will rise and they will fade, and sometimes they will fade away forever. Sometimes they'll go away for a whole season. Sometimes you'll never see them again. And this way you can trim and adjust the bonsai tree that is your character's social network. Now, for me, the best way to trim that bonsai tree is to burn it down. Sometimes the easiest way to keep a bunch of NPCs under control is to murder them. If you are not interested in playing a character anymore, or you feel like a character's characterization is just not interesting, fuck them. Find an excuse for them to die, right? Did the ship get hit a bunch in that? Did the ship get hit a bunch in that last space battle? Right? Did the pirates, wreck a hole in the hull? Well, sorry. Looks like that NPC that I hated playing got sucked out into space. The end. Right? Like, kill them off. God knows the players are gonna try, so you can do it too. I did this in Burning Wheel a ton. Right? In Burning Wheel, I was like, I'm not interested in this character. They're gone. They just go away. They're dead. They've been poisoned. Somebody froze the castle and everyone I didn't like was there, and now they're dead. And that's okay. Like, find reasons to exit them, because again, you, like I was telling Applesauce, you're allowed to get bored of characters too, right? Just because one time you'd played an uplifted squid that everybody thought was super funny doesn't mean you ever have to play them again, right? You can have them leave. People move on. Whether they're the crew of a spaceship, or they're part of a mercenary company, or whatever, you don't have to keep playing them. They can come and go as you please. So don't feel like you're attached to being forced to have a bunch of characters. Sometimes a character is most impactful when they have their moment and then they leave, right? You don't want to run them into the ground. Like, let's be real. The only reason everybody loves Connor Wu so much is because he died young, right? So again, don't feel like you have to keep building layers on this glorious NPC cake that you've got. Trim, cut, adjust, pare down, play the characters that you are passionate about and that matter the most to the PCs. Because that's the big lesson. That's the big learn, right? Pull this all back around. If a character in your game has no connection to any PC, then fucking evaporate them, right? They do not matter, right? They're not important if they're not connected to a PC. I know they're important to you, but they don't really matter because the story that we are telling in a role-playing game is going to be about the players. So let that happen. I like to fill gaps, and this is the advanced maneuver, all right? You ready? This is an advanced maneuver. Don't do it all the time. Don't do it every campaign. But what you can do is when you need an NPC, look at all of your NPCs that you already have. Do any of them fit the mold of the new NPC that you need? When someone says, hey, is there somebody on this ship that can get me some illegal drugs? Maybe the doctor, right? Maybe the doctor could be that. Maybe there is somebody with running a little side business out of the engineering corps, right? Maybe there's already a character that you can hook in to this thing. Now you got to be careful because it turns into if you're not gentle with this maneuver, it can turn into the like everybody is related to everybody else, and they're all like, oh, that's weird. My ex-girlfriend is your brother's sister. I guess that'd be your sister. Half sister. Oh, and her dad is our captain. And everybody is either related or knows each other or dating or they hate each other, right? Like you got to be careful with that. Now, in a game like Dogs in the Vineyard, it works perfectly because that's the community. That's how Dogs works. It's like, of course that's your cousin because everybody's got big families and they're all connected. But do what Game of Thrones did. Game of Thrones was the show. Game of Thrones was presented with a vast world of overlapping characters. And in many cases, they said, okay, we don't need 3 characters that are functionally identical. Let's mush them together and make them one character, right? Like, for example, in Court of Swords, I needed a temple that was being patronized by one of the characters' parents, and one of the other characters was raised in a monastery in the same kingdom. So I was like, obviously, it's the same monastery, right? It's the Temple of the Sun. That's how you can combine roles, right? When you are needing to add an additional NPC, when you're needing to create a new role, look at your existing stuff, have an idea of what everybody's purpose is, and then put them in that place. And I think that works. But again, you got to be delicate with that one. That's an advanced maneuver. Not that I don't think you can do it, but it's a thing. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think that the interchangeable Greek chorus is such a problem, right? Like a ship, especially a spaceship, is full of interchangeable Greek chorus bullshit. It's full of them. Red shirts, orange shirts, blue shirts, running around in the background doing stuff. They don't matter until they get a name, and they don't get a name until they're connected to the characters. And as far as accidental GMPCs go, Jesus, like, when are you ever going to have time to focus on one NPC? Give everybody their scene with the player. Know what all the characters want, right? And again, we've talked about this before. How to manage a ton of NPCs. All you need to know is 3 characterization things and 1 desire, right? What do we know about these characters and what do they want? Because what they want is the only thing that matters. When you're playing a character, what they want is funneled through the things you know about them. And every scene, they should be trying to get what they want. Every single fucking scene, right? Like, if Nomi goes to Yancey for something, yes, she is in that scene, and that's what she wants. She wants whatever she wants in that scene. She wants to get Yancey to give her permission to, I don't know, blow up a planet. But what Yancey wants is his own social advancement. So I always keep that in mind in every scene that Yancey's in. Same with the captain, same with Nicola, same with everybody. Every character in Far Verona, I know what they want, and I push for that in every scene they're in. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's overt. But again, credit where it's due. Vincent Baker in Apocalypse World said that NPC desires should not be complicated, right? They want safety. They want to be cared about. They want to bone and do drugs, and like they want to get what they want to get, and you should not overcomplicate that. And so that makes it easy to run the characters. What do they want? Think about that and try to point those desires at the same things the PCs want or at cross purposes, right? And that'll create all kinds of fun tension and drama, and that's what it's about. Now, if your game isn't about like a crew of people with their own desire, like if that's not the thing, don't make NPCs for all this shit. Like, the captain can just be the captain, and they can have one character trait, and what they can want is be a good captain. Like, that's it. You don't have to make big deal NPCs with like feelings and thoughts out of everything if that's not the way your game is going. Not every game has to do that. I like it because that's what's fun about RPGs for me, but you don't have to. You can just know that there is a captain. They're doing captain shit. That's fine. They don't have to be a person until the players want to interact with them personally and make them someone valuable. In which case, like I said at the beginning, go back, let your players help you determine some stuff about them. And then, as was pointed out, Mina pointed this right at the beginning of the question. I was saving it for the end. If you find playing all these characters to be tedious, let your players do some of it, right? Let your players do it. Like, just be like, okay, cool. Well, Mark and Bronze, you're not in this scene. Do you two want to play, like, I need a couple of Aquila soldiers. Can y'all play them for me? And trust your players not to be like, I'm going to go off the rails and do something ridiculous. Like, trust that they'll do it. And talk to them first, right? Don't just pull the rug out from under them and be like, you're playing them now. But say at the beginning, like, hey, if we have scenes where you're not in them, do you want to play NPCs? Like, would you be happy jumping in and playing as a character? I think you have a good idea of this. Yeah, just share the load, right? Let the others carry the burden for a bit. You play the NPC that you think matters most to the scene, needs to push the scene along, but let the absent players do the thing. Because then they get to play, they get to be part of the world, they get to create some details, and you can rope them into the larger stuff. And that's I think a great trick too. So thank you, Mina, for bringing that one up. Hopefully that helps. I'm a big fan, honestly, of like massive piles of NPCs, but you gotta prune that tree. You gotta snip that bonsai down to size, right? I think it's important. Don't let it grow. And hell, are there games that have mechanics for this stuff? Go and steal them. Like, again, read lots of games, because I bet you there is a game out there that like already has some tips and tricks for you. But remember, they're tips and tricks for that game, not for Stars Without Number. So use them at your own risk. Caveat emptor. So, my friends, this has been episode number 77. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've had a good time. And if you have questions, like I said at the top of the show, go ahead and go to my website, www.adam-koble.com. There's an office hours link. You can click that, fill out the form, record your voice like David and Applesauce did, or don't if you don't feel comfortable. That's okay too. I can read your question for you. And go ahead and submit your GMing quandaries, and we will answer them in future episodes. Thanks for coming, everybody. This has been Office Hours. I will see you next time. Bye.